Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you, and I hope all of you are as excited as I am to hear this talk tonight, Rethinking Materialism from a Feminine Leadership Perspective. How wonderful is that? It certainly resonates with my heart. It was a part of my studies was women's studies and gender relations and all that, and I just can't wait to hear Dr. Roya Akhavan speak to us. I'm going to just introduce Roya to you. Bear with me for a moment, but I'm sure you'd like to hear her background. Dr. Roya Akhavan currently serves as Professor and Director of Graduate Studies at the Department of Mass Communications, St. Cloud State University, which I believe is in Minnesota. In addition to research and publication in the field of international mass communication, Dr. Akhavan has maintained a research interest in peace studies. She's a frequent speaker at national and international forums on gender issues, the root causes of war, and spirituality in the 21st century. Her most recent work is a book entitled Peace for Our Planet, A New Approach. Dr. Akhavan has lived and worked in 4 different cultures: Persian, American, Japanese, and Chinese, and I'm sure she brings all that diversity and those really diverse perspectives to what she's going to share with us this evening. Dr. Roya Akhavan currently lives in Maple Grove, Minnesota. And so without further ado, let's just hand straight over to Roya, and we look forward to hearing very much what she's going to share with us this evening. And thank you to the whole team as well for tonight, Kay and all the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very kind introduction. And hello, dear friends. Thank you all so much for being here. And I would like to also take this opportunity to thank the organizing committee for allowing me to have the pleasure of speaking with you today. Of course, we have gathered together at a time when the world is going through an unprecedented process of upheaval in almost all areas of human life. And I truly feel that every moment that we spend together in thinking about and making a plan of action for resolving these issues is very precious indeed. I'm going to try to get the PowerPoint up first, and I will share it in a moment. So the current global pandemic has exposed more than ever before the shortcomings of the existing economic systems across the globe, particularly the persistent extremes in wealth and poverty within and among nations. One of the root causes of these extremes is the greed-driven materialism that continues to characterize human life across the planet, both at the individual and systemic levels. This pandemic has also provided us with an opportunity to pause and think about what kinds of economic systems we might want to replace the current unsustainable and collapsing structures with, and what kinds of leadership characteristics, particularly in the business arena, are likely to lead us away from these materialistic systems toward an economic order that can ensure material prosperity for all. So the first thing that we need to do in this discussion is to define some of the terms that I have just mentioned: materialism, and material prosperity, and to clarify the differences between the two. So, starting with materialism, at the individual level, materialism can be defined as a mindset that focuses on amassing wealth for the purpose of satisfying personal desires. While all human beings clearly have a necessary and legitimate need for material and economic well-being, materialism goes far beyond this need, to view the pursuit of an insatiable appetite for material acquisition as the main path to human happiness. In addition, the materialistic pursuit is based on the assumption that as human beings, we are atomized and disconnected entities capable of leading a meaningful and rewarding life on our own. And that it is completely logical for us to engage in endless competition throughout our lives and aspire to live in gated communities locked away from the misery of others. In short, the materialistic mindset is self-centered, competitive, greed-driven, and uncaring. But the phenomenon of materialism is not simply limited to the individual consumer's mindset. It is also a major problem at the systemic level. Despite the growing constructive global consciousness in the last few decades about the need for what has come to be called moral capitalism, and also the new millennial generation's natural tendency toward global solidarity and their support for socially responsible businesses, which is a truly hopeful sign of our times, and one that I have written and spoken about previously. The main thrust in business leadership today continues to remain largely on values that are greed-driven and uncaring. So it is becoming increasingly clear that in order to mitigate these glaring extremes in wealth and poverty, we need to educate and lead our way out of the materialistic mindset toward a mindset that can ensure material prosperity for all. So what is the definition of material prosperity? Within this paradigm, human happiness is seen as being anchored in the ability to make a positive social impact while also pursuing one's own personal growth. A major assumption of this paradigm is that as human beings, we are incapable of experiencing true joy if we are constantly surrounded by and witness to the deprivation and suffering of others. In other words, the material prosperity paradigm rests on the realization that we are all interconnected like the cells in one human body, and that we are indeed all one. It is an organic at system level way of thinking about humanity as a body, rather than as an atomized and disconnected set of individuals. So, unlike the self-centered propensities of the material materialistic pursuit. The search for material prosperity is motivated by a desire to promote shared prosperity within a system that provides sufficient resources for all human beings to fulfill their potential. Instead of focusing on a constant, often aggressive competition to get ahead and score a win, the material prosperity paradigm upholds such core individual and systemic values as justice, compassion, caring, and collaboration to produce win-win outcomes. It is now very important to point out that nowhere in the material prosperity paradigm is wealth itself seen as undesirable or suspect. The key question to be addressed is not the intrinsic value of material wealth per se, but rather how it is earned, how it is used, and very importantly, how it is distributed. In fact, the proper expenditure of wealth in the service of collective prosperity can actually become a means of achieving spiritual goals and aspirations. And I am glad to note that increasingly billionaires and people of means are coming to that realization and starting to act in that way, many of them. So if we accept the material prosperity paradigm as the superior solution to the welfare and happiness of all segments of human society, the next question becomes, what are the changes that are required in corporate leadership models and values that would enable us to shift from a materialistic paradigm to one that is capable of promoting material prosperity for all? One might argue that the most effective business leadership model for facilitating a transformation away from materialism must itself embody the compassionate and caring communal values that are inherent in the material prosperity paradigm. Interestingly, since the 1990s, the scholarly literature on the topic of business management has continued to emphasize the need for moving away from the old management mindsets toward new leadership models in the interest of greater employee job satisfaction and optimal productivity. In these studies, the new leadership models incorporate such communal values as caring and nurturing, and place the emphasis on strengthening the quality of human connections within organizations. As Fairholm, one of the pioneers of these studies, has put it, a key characteristic of old-style management is the extent to which it is keyed to a money standard. In the new paradigm, leadership is caring for people. If we closely examine the research literature in this area, we will find that the progression from the old management to the new leadership paradigm has corresponded with a shift away from characteristics that are that have traditionally been identified primarily with the masculine aspect of the human species to values and orientations that have traditionally been associated with the feminine. And this shift has included moving from influence through exercise of legitimate power or position to influence through persuasion or personal networking, from competition, play hard, to cooperation, play fair, from individualism, by me, for me, to collectivism, team first, and from exclusionary, divide and conquer, to inclusionary, that is power sharing and sense of family. So as Igli and Carly have also put it, another set of researchers who have studied this, modern characterizations of effective leadership have become more consonant with the female gender role. Also, a series of industry studies on effective leadership undertaken by McKinsey and Company have concluded that those leadership characteristics, or behaviors rather, more often applied by women, reinforce a company's organizational performance and other levels of productivity on several dimensions. Now, here's a very important point. Note that these studies do not categorically state that women are better leaders than men, but that the leadership behaviors more consonant with the female gender roles and the leadership behaviors more often applied by women lead to better organizational performance. So again, it is certain leadership behaviors and characteristics that produce better performance, and not necessarily the gender of the person displaying them. In addition to the values that I have just discussed, excuse me, it is important to point out that another very important characteristic required of a true leader is having the moral courage to articulate, uphold, and consistently behave according to core values, even when it is difficult to do so. So it is the moral courage to uphold justice, for example, that is of paramount importance in this leadership profile, not, quote, toughness per se. And this is a crucial point to make in the context of a topic which has traditionally been reduced to a soft versus tough dichotomy, with the tough side having been given the higher value. It's also important to point out that although the historic socialization of women, the way women have been brought up, may tend to lend itself readily to, or more readily, to embracing a caring and nurturing and morally courageous and power-sharing posture in leadership, both men and women are fully capable of exhibiting such leadership values. And so I would restate the conclusion of the scholarly and industry studies on this topic as follows. As you can see on this slide, in our contemporary 21st century global society, the primary attributes of an effective leader, whether male or female, reflect traditionally feminine characteristics. The key question becomes, how can we make sure that men in leadership roles are more readily willing and allowed to express the caring and compassionate aspects of their nature, and at the same time allow women to become leaders without having to first give up their feminine orientation toward caring and compassion in order to fit into dominant patriarchal corporate cultures. As of this moment, we can see some hopeful signs of some progress in this regard. As I have mentioned, leadership literature began to encourage this shift in empirical terms in the early 1990s. And since then, the constructive collective consciousness about this issue has continued to grow, to the point that in the last few years in particular, we have seen the rise of many women political leaders internationally, some of whom visibly embody these feminine leadership characteristics. And some, like New Zealand Jacinda Ardern, are successfully institutionalizing the concept of ensuring citizen well-being in place of traditional drivers like increased GDP in planning their national economic strategies. In addition, we are also beginning to see examples of male leaders who are more open to leading with empathy and care. Justin Trudeau of Canada comes to mind, for example. We also have increasing empirical evidence about the effectiveness of these approaches in improving both national reputation and performance. And of course, these days, we continue to get new data about the better performance of such leaders in dealing with, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, mentioning New Zealand, led by Prime Minister Ardern. They were able to eliminate COVID-19 cases from their population of 5 million by May 15, and despite isolated cases in single digits from time to time, the people of New Zealand have seen very few deaths from the pandemic. Another example is Taiwan, with a population of 24 million people, which under the leadership of President Tsai Ing-wen has managed to keep the total number of deaths from COVID to only 7 people during the last several months. In Europe, which has been an unwieldy hotspot for COVID-19 deaths, such countries as Finland, led by Prime Minister Sanna Marin, and Germany, led by Chancellor Angela Merkel, have had visibly greater success compared to others in controlling the pandemic. And of course, all the authors and journalists who have investigated and written about this topic attribute these successes in large part to the ability of these women leaders to engage the crisis with moral courage, compassion, and empathy, and of course, great competence. But the corporate arena, with some exceptions of course, tends to lag behind in embracing compassionate and communal behaviors, despite the effectiveness that they have shown in, sorry, I'm not ready for the thank you yet. in achieving that most coveted corporate prize, long-term and sustained productivity growth. The clear reason for this, of course, is the persisting dominance of traditionally hierarchical and rugged, quote, male characteristics in corporate management habits and models. So, as in every other discussion about positive social and economic change, the ultimate discussion or question for discussion becomes, what can each of us as individuals do to facilitate the achievement of a more just and equitable economic system? Obviously, this is a vast topic for reflection and discussion, which I hope all of you will participate in. But to open up the discussion, I would like to take a moment to emphasize the importance of the role of men in promoting compassionate and caring leadership models. Very often, the hegemonic hold that patriarchal mindsets continue to have in almost all societies across the globe tends to relegate the discourse on any topic that somehow touches on gender equality to a separate realm as a, quote, women's issue. And in turn, that tends to, at best, push men into a spectator's role in these discourses. Yet, clearly, the enterprise of bringing more compassionate characteristics to the fore in corporate leadership is very much a men's as well as a women's issue. And of course, also the enterprise of establishing material prosperity for humanity and achieving peace and justice at all levels. So, consistent with the core values of shared material prosperity, it is important that we adopt inclusive frameworks that emphasize the oneness of humanity in all of our discourses. And I hope that today's discussion will provide us with some inspiration and conceptual tools to carry into meaningful conversations on this topic in both our personal and professional lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting and very thought-provoking, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions. Sincere thank you from me, and at the end of the evening there'll be a thank you from the whole team, I'm sure.